Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a story of geographical whiplash that's honestly just kind of hard to wrap your head around. We're looking at the breathtaking expansion and the really sudden, violent collapse of the Norse world. We're going to span the entire globe here, from the icy, pristine shores of North America, where they literally built year-round settlements, all the way to the glittering courts of the Byzantine Empire, and then finally ending up in a muddy, blood-soaked field in Yorkshire, where the whole era just abruptly stops. 7 feet of English ground, or as much more as he needs, as he is taller than most men. That's a chilling promise, right? It comes from the English king Harold Godwinson, right before a massive clash with an invading Norse army. When he was asked what he'd actually offer the towering Norwegian king Harold Hardrada, Godwinson coldly delivered that exact reply. It's an incredible hook. I mean, how did the most far-reaching warrior culture the world had ever seen, a culture that literally crossed the Atlantic Ocean, end up buried in a Yorkshire field? Let's get into it. So, to really understand the end, we have to look at the massive span of this Viking epic. It formally kicks off around 793 with that absolutely shocking raid on the Lindisfarne monastery in England. Then, fast forward to 1021, and we see their furthest western reach, landing in the Americas. And finally, 1066 brings us to the Battle of Stamford Bridge, the definitive defeat that pretty much closed the curtain on the entire age. Section 1. The Western Frontier. Landsocks Meadows uncovered.
Okay, let's pan our lens westward for a second to the northernmost tip of Newfoundland, Canada. For centuries, the idea that the Norse reached America, a place the sagas called Vinland, well, it was considered a total myth. But in the 1960s, that myth became reality. Norwegian explorer Helge Ingstad and his wife, archaeologist Anne Stine Ingstad, uncovered undeniable physical proof. We're talking bronze fastening pins, boat rivets, and wood shavings that clearly pointed to a carpentry workshop. They even found iron slag and a simple smelter right in the middle of a floor, which was enough to make hundreds of nails. And perhaps the most telling thing of all, small pieces of Icelandic and Greenlandic jasper. These were used as fire strikers, and they completely, 100% prove these explorers came from the Norse world.
And the craziest part is, we know exactly when they were there. 1021. This precise year was figured out in a 2021 Nature study. Scientists basically used radiocarbon dating on tree rings found at the site, looking for a very specific solar anomaly in the atmospheric carbon that happened back in the year 993. So that by counting the rings outward from there to the bark, they pinpointed the exact cutting year of the wood to 1021 CE. Think about that for a second. That is a staggering 500 years before Christopher Columbus.
Think about the sheer scale of ambition required here. This wasn't just, a couple of tents pitched on a beach. Archaeological calculations show that constructing the 3 main halls and the smaller huts at Meadows required felling at least 86 trees for the roof supports alone, plus cutting 1,100 cubic meters of sod. This was a highly specialized, year-round base camp and boat repair facility built to actually survive a brutal northern winter. To put that massive effort into perspective for you, providing the estimated 60 to 90 laborers needed to build this thing, that would have required 5 to 7% of the entire Greenland Norse population at the time.
Section 2. The Eastern Mercenary. Hardrada, the Last Viking.
So while some Norsemen were out exploring America, others were busy forging empires over in the east. Enter Harold Hardrada, a guy who's often called the last great Viking. And his rise is just explosive. Back in 1030, at just 15 years old, he fought alongside his half-brother at the Battle of Stiklestad. He was defeated, and he had to flee into exile in Kiev. But, well, he didn't stay defeated for long. In the 1030s, he makes this epic journey to the glittering courts of Constantinople to join the Varangian Guard. These were the elite mercenary bodyguards of the Byzantine emperor. By 1046, he's back home with massive wealth, serious military experience, and he gets crowned King of Norway.
We actually even have a rare Byzantine account of Harold's time there. A writer named Meadows recorded this quote, basically noting that the emperor gave Harold the fancy title of Sputharo Candidate as a reward for his valor in subduing a revolt down in Bulgaria. It brilliantly illustrates that even the highly sophisticated Byzantines viewed Harold as this royal military elite, cementing his reputation as an incredibly ambitious, top-tier warrior.
Section 3. Blood on Stamford Bridge. The Final Battle.
Hardrada's ambition simply couldn't be contained to Norway. In September 1066, he teams up with Tostig Godwinson, who happened to be the exiled brother of the English king, Harold Godwinson.
Together, they invade northern England with an army of 10,000 troops and 300 ships, completely setting the stage for a dramatic climax. And here is where the story takes a massive turn. The Norse had literally just won a victory at Fulford and negotiated the surrender of York. So on September 25th, they're marching over to Stamford Bridge to collect peace hostages. It was a really unusually warm day, so they actually left their heavy chainmail coats, their burnies, way back at their ships in Ruckle. But here comes King Harold Godwinson of England. He had just force-marched his army 185 miles from London in only 4 days. The dramatic irony here is absolutely stunning. The unarmored Norse were entirely unaware that an exhausted, desperate, glittering wall of English steel was right on top of them.
The sudden appearance of the English army caught the Norwegians totally off guard. To buy time for Hardrada to actually form up a shield wall on the higher ground, a lone Norse berserker takes a stand right on the narrow wooden bridge crossing the River Derwent. According to the chronicles, this absolute giant of a man, armed with nothing but a massive Danax and wearing literally zero armor, held off the entire English army. He cut down more than 40 Englishmen all by himself. So, how on earth do you defeat a giant on a narrow bridge?
Well, an English soldier found a rather visceral solution. He floated under the bridge in a little boat, or maybe a wooden barrel, depending on which account you read, and he thrust his spear right up through the chinks in the wooden floorboards, mortally wounding the warrior from below. Brutal, right? Once the bridge was finally cleared, the English poured across to clash directly with those unarmored Norsemen.
Section 4. The End of an Era. The Collapse of the Epoch.
The battle that followed the crossing was just brutal. Hardrada, the last great Viking, fought fiercely in a total state of berserker rage, swinging his sword with both hands. But remember, he didn't have his armor. He was struck in the windpipe by a stray arrow and killed. Tostig was killed too. With their leaders dead, the Norse shield wall started to fragment and fracture. Meanwhile, back at the ships, a Norwegian guy named Eystein Ore gathers the remaining fully armed reinforcements, and they literally run 16 miles to the battlefield. This doomed counterattack became known as Ore's Storm. They ran so hard in their heavy armor that some reportedly just collapsed and died of sheer exhaustion before they even got to swing a sword. They did briefly check the English advance, but ultimately they were overwhelmed and slaughtered.
The numbers here really tell the story of a complete and devastating rout. The Norse invasion force arrived in England boasting this massive fleet of 300 longships, but the destruction at Stamford Bridge was so absolute, the slaughter was so complete that when the English king finally offered a truce to the survivors, they only needed 24 ships to carry them back home to Orkney in Norway. Just 24 out of 300.
The sheer volume of death on that small plot of land was horrific. Chroniclers, writing decades later, actually noted that bleached bones still whitened the Yorkshire field a full 50 years after the battle. Let that haunting aftermath sink in for a second. But you know, this brutal English victory came at a really massive cost. That exhausting march, followed by this vicious, all-out battle, severely depleted King Harold Godwinson's forces. And that inadvertently cleared the path for William the Conqueror and the Norman invasion at the Battle of Hastings just 3 weeks later.
Which brings us right back to our opening quote, 7 feet of English ground. It's a fascinating, deeply tragic irony. The very same relentless ambition, the incredible seafaring skill, and that fearless expansionism that drove the Norse to build settlements in the icy wilderness of North America 500 years before Columbus, it ultimately sealed their doom in the mud of England. What does it really say about the limits of human expansion when the world's most far-reaching conquerors are ultimately stopped by a single arrow and the sheer exhaustion of a Yorkshire field? It's something to think about. Thanks so much for exploring this fascinating history with me in today's Explainer.